Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the final Telmix broadcast for 2017. Can't believe that we have made it through this year. We're at the end of another really great year, and today we're bringing you a subject in this broadcast which is a very much talked about topic. We always save the best for last, and we're talking about something that I know a lot of business leaders are really concerned with in their business organizational strategy at the moment, and that is strategic workforce planning. So, as you know, my name is Katie Roberts, and we bring these Telmix broadcasts to you every month, and we discuss some of the things that are really close to the business leaders and consultant community that we work with, really close to their hearts. So we're back again for another one, and also, as you know, as we've previously done, this broadcast is being recorded, so it will be available to be watched again on our YouTube channel. So also just keep an eye out for any links, etc., in our social media and in your emails. We'll be sure to send that out to you as well. But if you'd like to chat with us, and if you want to send any questions over to you, to us, to cover during this half hour, feel free to do that under the hashtag TelmixChat on Twitter, and we'll see if we can get to some of those questions in today's session. So, as I mentioned, strategic workforce planning. I mean, the world that we work in, our economy, everything is in a state of flux. Everything is changing. The way that we do things is changing. And strategic workforce planning is becoming the #1 thing on most business leaders' agenda. And joining us today on this discussion is stalwart consultant and someone who knows all about SWP and growth strategies and leadership management styles and techniques and all kinds of things. Independent consultant Carl McInerney. So Carl, thank you so much for giving half an hour of your time today. Really appreciate you being here. I wonder if you can just in a few minutes just give the audience a little bit of a insight into who you are, what you do, and what brings you to where you are today in terms of consulting.
Sure, yeah. Hi, Katie. My name's Carl McInerney, and in my career I've worked in corporate business and I've worked in private business, so large and small. An example of the large would be in Coca-Cola. I work with retailers on strategic supply chain change and on marketing operations, so commercialization of the annual business plan. I drove a lot of change through lots of new products answering the trends which were changing very rapidly. On the private side, I work with organizations that were in high growth, active organizations, and from startup to a large company, not only was I responsible for the business development, maturity of the business, and what I learned is you need something very different at the startup as it's going through infancy, perhaps I guess you'd call it the teenage years, adolescence, bring into an adult company, and I found that you needed different strategies, different people strategies along that path.
Perfect. Well, it's great to have you here, Carl. So thank you for that. We are experiencing a little bit of a delay, so if there's anything I do miss out on, I may just ask you just to tell us again. But I'm going to jump straight into our questions. We've got lots to discuss today. So the world of strategic workforce planning and in fact change management is seemingly a massively complex one, but one that is fast becoming the #1 driving force in most organizations throughout the world. Businesses want to ensure that they have the right talent at the right cost to company at the right time and all being productive. But most of all, that talent is producing value and results for the organization as a whole. So, Carl, why would you say there's been this recent drive in businesses getting their houses in order, so to speak, and this intense focus on SWP?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, but the world is getting more and more competitive. Finding profit is getting thinner. It feels like, I've heard people say this in organizations, big and small, it feels like we're working harder and harder to stand still, to, definitely stay competitive and grow. And of course, we're focused on the bottom line. So how do you get increased productivity? If you went back 20, 30, 40 years, it was perhaps about buying equipment, capital. I guess now capital is also about human capital. So we're seeing that people's skills is changing. We're seeing that in some circumstances there's widespread skill shortages. So you need to grow your people to stay and become more competitive. So you're looking for a better contribution, value for those individuals, and that's how you can increase productivity.
So when it comes to market fluctuations, we've touched on it very lightly. Try as hard as we may, the art of predicting exactly what happens will always remain a bit of a mythical exercise. And regardless of how much data you process and feedback you get. So how does a strong SWP effort or strategic workforce planning effort enable an organization to remain flexible and agile according to market demands?
Well, I guess there's two sides to flexible. Strategic workforce planning is a continuous process, so it's an iteration, and in completing that iteration, regular reviewing the business strategy against your people needs. Then a strategy by nature is not 1 year or 1 month, it's 3 years, 5 years. You should be continually forecasting and building in flexibility. I suppose a more simple example would be, though, intelligent use of high-value alternatives, such as interims, contract work, bringing in some of those specialist skills at key times. If the business is going through a high transition, then an interim for a shorter period can really help.
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. So, you know, if we just had to pause for a second and look internally within an organization, where does strategic workforce planning help with understanding things like resource demographics, turnover, vacancy rates, skills matrices, skills gaps, things like that? How does that help internal, really organizations and their leaders be able to plan ahead?
Yeah, I guess it's about leveraging data, whether that's internal data or external. So if you think about putting a business plan together, you wouldn't do that without doing a SWOT, your strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats, and you'd probably do a PESTLE. So there you've got a lot of external factors as well, economic and political and people too. So that's about having the data that then goes to inform the need for change. The data changes, that's when you identify problems, that's when you go back to the strategic business plan and look at fixing those problems. So it helps you identify problems and trends and fix them.
And I suppose, you know, similarly to that question, if we look at the challenges of trying to forecast your workforce demands against an increasingly fluctuating market, where does strategic workforce planning fit into an organization's ongoing life cycle, and in particular the way they handle and adapt to change? I mean, it's surely not something you do as a one-off, thinking, okay, that's done, great, I know exactly where my strengths and my weaknesses are, but it's probably something that has to be done continuously and has to be reviewed continuously because your organization changes all the time, and because your organization is changing, your workforce planning has to also create this almost embracing change mentality and culture. So how does it fit into an organization's ongoing, long-term life cycle?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I suppose life cycle and forecast and change are the kind of key words coming out there. What's the difference between strategic workforce planning and HR resource planning? Well, I think I'd probably say regular resource planning is short-term. Workforce planning, the nature of some of those words is really about the long-term. And if you're looking long-term, it's about looking at the long-term changes in your strategic business plan. And the big change is making sure that workforce planning is a key pillar in that process. And yes, it's a continuous process. There's iteration. You're always constantly reviewing. An example might be in a high growth business where it's startup through to maturity, you might need lots of business development managers who go out and win business. But the kind of people you get there, are the loners, the hunters. When you then have a few more customers, you need account managers who are a completely different type of resource and a different set of skills. So things change along the high growth curve in terms of the kind of resources you need. And they're the kind of things you need to think about in advance and put it into a plan.
And just as an aside for the second, before I ask you the next question, you have personally been in executive leadership positions. You have been part of that strategy building exercise, for organizations like Coca-Cola. Where does the strategic workforce planning sit? Where does that responsibility lie? Is it with the HR function? Is it with the leadership team? Is it at board level? Is it throughout the organization? Where does that fit into traditional hierarchy, if I can put it in that way?
I suppose traditionally, human resources as a separate function to some of the operational and commercial resources. You might call them an HR business partner, but I didn't feel it was a key strategic pillar. I thought it was auxiliary is the wrong word, but a service function. That has to change when you start looking at strategic workforce planning. I mean, certainly, what you're doing is setting up a process.
Yeah.
HR definitely create the start of the plan. You need to get buy-in from the board, from the other functions, and they need to be sitting with that process. So it's cross-functional. It's aligning people to your strategy, and your strategy involves sales and marketing and finance and all those other things. So it needs to be cross-functional, and there needs to be good sponsorship and a board of stakeholders.
And I think that's you've hit the nail on the head. That's where it is. It's a cross-functional part. It's not just an isolated activity that is done. And I think that's where the big change is coming, where leaders are starting to realize, hang on, this is not just something I do to get off my to-do list, but it's actually a big part of having my talent and resource function give value back into the business and start infiltrating across the board, which is really interesting because it fits into that whole future of work. Where is the future of work going? So very, very interesting, aspect. But we know that our workforce keeps evolving, and trends in the way that we work and how long we work at a particular institution has changed dramatically over the past 5 to 10 years. I think I read somewhere where, in the next few years, almost 50% of the workforce are going to be millennials, so it's a massively changing workforce that we're looking at. So with the long-term business strategy in mind, how does strategic workforce planning enable building a strong foundation for tomorrow's leadership? And what are some of the key things that organizations should be doing today to ensure that they have the resource and skill to be able to lead effectively tomorrow?
Yeah, it's interesting. If you look at strategic workforce planning, one of the things I'd say is that you're creating a pipeline, internal and external talent. So when I've done sales roles and business development roles, you're going out scouting for you know what kind of customers you're looking for. You're going out scouting for those customers, and you're continually trying to monitor your pipeline and harvest them, and that's a real core function and a core business process. I'm not sure if that same pipeline methodology is necessarily used in selecting and developing leaders, really. I think in terms of tomorrow's leaders, soft skills, isn't it? And where are they going to get those skills? In my time in leadership, there were routes that you could take. And you were with a company a long time. There was training you developed, you managed teams. There was a process there that you grew with, and I think tomorrow's leaders very much need to be focused on increasing contribution. So my role as a leader, I always said, was creating the environment to allow people to perform at their best. Well, that's not an easy thing to just get quickly. You need to find routes to be able to help people develop in those areas, and that's becoming a broader general manager in a business. Well, in a large organization like Coke, functions of function, they would encourage you to get breadth, not just depth. I think there is a danger in the modern world that people get a lot of depth in subjects, but they're not getting the breadth and the people understanding how to get the best from people.
Yeah. And with so many parts of an organization becoming automated, we just talk about, the future of AI, the future of how we work. So in AI and robotics and general automation of processes. as well as the introduction of tech, as I mentioned, like AI and robotics. Some would say that entire HR programs are at risk of becoming completely robotic, so to speak. So in this rapidly changing world, how does an effective workforce plan ensure that the company maintains the right talent or skill expertise to complement a technically dominated industry? Because obviously, after all, we the human element will always remain and will always be needed. But how do we find that balance? How do we make sure that the company, or how does a workforce plan ensure that the company maintains the right talent to complement this really changing technical world?
Yeah, I think there is a change in mindset. I mean, I'll say it again. Strategic workforce planning does need to become a key pillar in the business strategy function. I think there's something around recognizing some of the soft skills that people need, really, and the value that they can add in the technical world.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think computers and robots and AI will certainly do the technical stuff, and they'll be very good at taking over things that can be easily repeated, programmed in and repeated, and that's great. That's good for productivity. But what about things like problem-solving, decision-making? What about making thinking visible, sharing ideas with people? What about being opportunistic, looking for new opportunities? What about, I suppose, best of all is probably something like thinking beyond the plan. Where do you start to train people to do that kind of work? Because I think you only learn those skills in real life situations. So something like problem solving and decision making, situation analysis, all of those things you learn through working together. So I think there's got to be something around developing those skills if you want to be competitive. How can you differentiate yourself? You want to buy the same robots, but how you develop your people can be very different.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a culture change. That's really what the message is that I'm picking up. It's a big piece. And if we had someone watching today that was just at the very start of this, they know that they need to implement a drastic change in their organization, but they were just at the cusp of any kind of strategic workforce planning effort or program. What would you say, or what would your advice be to them on getting started? What are the fundamental things that they need to start doing today to be able to implement something like this?
I would say keep it really, really simple. So start simple, tailor it to you and your organization and your culture. It's a process. You're implementing a process, an iterative process, and like any process, it has a number of steps in the middle, and then it has an outcome or an output. So be conscious of the problem that you're trying to fix, or the situation that you're appraising, really. And remember, it's about increasing productivity, increasing competitiveness, and then it's about aligning then people to your strategy. But it is about implementing a process. That's the key thing. Keep it simple.
And so, in the same line, what would your advice be to an organization who is considering introducing this, a strategic workforce plan, but they need to get some buy-in from the rest of the management team or the board or even the rest of the workforce in general? How would you suggest they approach getting that buy-in and starting that discussion, really?
I suppose, first of all, it's a selling job, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I think I said before, it is going to come. It is going to come from HR. They're going to start to create, but it's a selling job, so it's got to have payback. So you need a catalyst for engagement. They need to understand what the benefit of this is and why they should invest their time. Certainly HR, they drive the creation for this, but then it's about engaging the stakeholders, explaining how it's aligned to the business strategy, getting a good sponsor, a board sponsor, making sure it has a position in annual planning and strategic planning, and I suppose creating a division and understanding the payback. The payback might be about avoiding risk, because I think there's an awful lot in here that is about avoiding risk. And the way to avoid the risk is through planning ahead, and recognizing, if I put it back to the example of mine, you don't wait till your business has slowed down to go and find new customers, because you lose momentum. So if you're going to create and maintain momentum here, you have to be looking ahead continually, identifying the risks, identifying the gaps. Otherwise, you lose momentum and you start going backwards.
And Carl, I want to just touch on that for a second before I come to you for your final thoughts, before we end the session today. So, you personally, you have been involved in strategic workforce planning before, and you now work independently, and offer support to organizations who are looking to grow, implement growth strategies, all kinds of things. Why do you think organizations are turning towards independent talent like yours, to help them get them on track, for something so huge and so important like strategic workforce planning?
I would say that as organizations have entered this period of slower growth, things biting at the profit margins, cost reductions for one, so everyone's focused on a core function. When it comes to creating change, it takes a different mindset, I believe. And typically, if you're in that situation, you're trying to solve a problem. You're looking at, you're assessing a situation, you're doing some problem solving and decision making. It's good to have people that are practiced in that area, people who can facilitate. It's good to have people who have some process on hand and help you move through something quickly in a really efficient and effective way. Someone that can come in, rapid change and some lasting results, and somebody who's experienced in that area. That's a way to create momentum.
Fantastic. And listen, just as I see that we're just coming up to almost coming up to 5 o'clock here in the UK. Just some final thoughts, Carl. Anything that you could leave our viewers with, who are about to embark on establishing an SWP program in their own organizations? Any final thoughts that you want to just add before we close today?
I suppose I'd summarize by saying that this is not complicated stuff. It doesn't need to be. It's about creating a framework, aligning your people strategy and your changing people strategy to your business strategy, maximizing your return on people. Sounds like quite a hard robotic word, and a word used now is human capital. A piece of plant and equipment, you need to invest in it, you need to maintain it, and this is about creating a flexible talent plan. The leaders of the future certainly will need to have different skills, different attributes, and different preferences. They're gonna need to be people who want to be maintaining the status quo and in the same job for long periods of time. Really enjoy change. That's where they find their challenge. That's where they get their motivation. And I think that's where skills beyond the technical roles are needed. You may start with a highly intelligent, very proficient technical manager in your business. At some point, they're going to need to transition to become a coach and a mentor. They're going to have to be involved in change. So, if you haven't always got the people to help with change and with transition on the day job, but it's how to get more out of people, how to increase their contribution, finding the right people or growing people with those skills to transition and grow.
Fantastic. That ends us on such a great note. I think the thing that stuck out for me there was creating a flexible talent plan. That's exactly what it is. It's, nobody knows what an organization is going to look like in a few years' time, we may be able to have a good guess at it based on data, but remaining agile and flexible is probably the biggest tool that will help you flex to whatever demands are placed on you and how your customer demands are changing and all the rest. So, Carl, thank you so much for your thoughts today and your insight, and for sharing that and for joining me today on today's broadcast. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah.
And just for our viewers, just so that you know, that was the end. That is the last broadcast for 2017, as I mentioned. But we will be back in 2018 with another one. So make sure that you keep an eye on our social media and your email inboxes. We'll be letting you know as soon as the next one is ready to be broadcasted. But that, other than that, that leaves me with nothing more to say than I do hope that you have a wonderful festive season. If you are traveling, travel safely. If you're spending time with family and friends, enjoy it. And we will see you in the new year again with another exciting schedule of broadcasts and lots of things planned for 2018 ahead. Make sure that you do keep an eye on our resources page at telmix.com for more information about strategic workforce planning, change management, developing agile organizations, all the things that we've touched on in today's broadcast. So do go and have a look at www.telmix.com and look at our resources page for lots of blog articles and white papers and profiles and things like that on those kind of subjects. But other than that, we will see you in the new year. Thank you for watching, and from me, good night and have a wonderful rest of the week.